Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, hi, I'm Olivia. Today I'm going to be talking about the true story behind the Amityville Horror. 112 Ocean Avenue is an address that lives in infamy, 30 miles outside of New York City in the Long Island town of Amityville. Stands a house that upon first glance looks like many other houses. You likely wouldn't notice it as you drove by, but inside the house, horrible things happened. Dark things that seem to leave a stain on the house that won't go away. The story begins with the DeFeos, a family of 7 who lived in the house in the 1970s. On November 23, 1974, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. killed the other 6 members of his family. His parents, Lutz and Ronald DeFeo Sr., and his siblings, 18-year-old Dawn, 13-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John Matthew. He shot them all with a .35 caliber rifle while they slept. He shot his parents twice and each of his siblings only once. DeFeo Jr. reportedly had problems with his father, who was rumored to be abusive and had even threatened him with violence before. DeFeo Jr.'s troubled childhood led to substance abuse as an adult that was supported by his parents, who let him live at home and gave him money since he could barely hold down a job. On the day in question, he left work and went to a bar, where he tried to call home multiple times but to no avail, which he complained about to other patrons. Once he left, he didn't stay gone. He would return to the bar at 6:30 p.m., declaring, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot." DeFeo and a small group of people went to the house and found the massacred family. One of the members of the group called the police. DeFeo initially told them when he returned home from work on the evening of November 13th, he discovered that someone had broken into his home and killed every member of his family. He told detectives he thought the murders may have been carried out by Louis Fellini, a mafia hitman. The investigation, however, revealed that the murders had occurred in the morning at around 3:15 a.m., when DeFeo would have been home. At which point, DeFeo began saying that Fellini and an accomplice had broken into the house the morning of November 13th and forced him at gunpoint to kill his entire family. But under scrutiny, that story didn't hold up, and police eventually got DeFeo to confess to killing his entire family. He then led them to where he had discarded the rifle and bloody clothes. DeFeo Jr.'s most chilling revelation was when he said, quote, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." Authorities found all 6 family members in the exact same position, face down in their beds, which suggests they had been arranged that way. But what's even creepier is that there were no signs of struggle, or signs that the family had been drugged. And the police determined that a silencer hadn't been fitted on the gun. So hypothetically, the DeFeos should have woken up to the sound of gunshots. It would have taken at least 15 minutes for DeFeo Jr. to kill all his family members. Why did none of them wake up after hearing the gunshots? Or at least the neighbors should have heard the gun go off, but no local reports of gunshots were logged. The only thing heard was the DeFeo's dog barking away. At the time, police and investigators considered the possibility that there was more than one person responsible for the murders. It was the only way they could make sense of some of the stranger aspects of the crime, but the existence of a second culprit has never been proven. The only person ever tried for the murders was DeFeo Jr. Although he had already confessed, his defense would later attempt to enter a plea of insanity, claiming DeFeo was guided by malevolent voices in his head and couldn't control his behavior. So it's unclear if there was already something inside the house, something evil reaching out to the living, or if this was merely an excuse to cover up a horrible crime. The prosecution believed it was the latter. They argued that DeFeo Jr. was just a drug addict who was well aware of what he was doing that night. He just didn't care. He was convicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 concurrent sentences of 25 years to life. DeFeo Jr. has since changed his story several times. According to one interview he gave in 1986, his sister Dawn killed their father. after which their mother killed Dawn and the other children before turning the gun on herself. Then, in 1990, he claimed that Dawn shot the majority of the DeFeos before he killed Dawn, and he maintains that his lawyer, William Weber, pressured him into the insanity defense they pushed at his trial. Regardless, his requests for parole have all been denied. 13 months later, the Lutz family bought the house at the drastically reduced price of $80,000. Nothing like a mass murder to drive a bargain. It's also rumored they got all the furniture that had been inside the home at the time of the murders. George and Kathleen Lutz and their 3 children moved into what they thought would be their dream home. Due to the grim reputation of the house, a friend of George's suggested that they should have the house blessed by a Catholic priest. When a priest came to bless the house, he allegedly heard a voice scream, "Get out." Though he didn't mention that to the family, he did leave them with this chilling remark. He said, "You know, I felt something really strange in that one upstairs bedroom." When he described the bedroom, the Lutzes explained how they planned on using it as a sewing room. The priest said, "That's good, as long as no one sleeps in there." Almost immediately things were wrong. A sense of unease pervaded the atmosphere. They felt cold spots throughout the house, jolting sounds would wake them in the middle of the night, and all of this took its toll on the Lutzes, causing drastic personality changes. George began to seclude himself from the family, obsessed over the fireplace that never seemed to warm him. He also was said to wake up at 3:15 every morning, the same time Ron DeFeo Jr. carried out the murders. Kathy also began to undergo a series of strange occurrences. She described being touched by an unseen person on multiple occasions, and once, after waking from a deep sleep, her face was that of an old lady that took hours to dissipate. Even the Lutz children began to argue more than usual. The youngest child, Missy, described speaking to an angel that was living in her room. This angel, Missy claims, was named Jody. One day, George claimed to have witnessed a pig with red, glowing eyes peering at him from the upstairs bedroom window. When he ran up to check on Missy, she was in her bed. No one else was in the room. But when Missy described Jody, she said it was able to change shape and form at will, and would often present itself as a large pig. They reported green slime oozing from the walls and eyes peering into the house from the outside. They smelled foul odors with no origin, and hundreds of flies tormented the family. They heard disembodied footsteps, saw knives being thrown off kitchen counters, doors ripped off hinges, and cloven hoof prints left outside in the snow. The final night the Lutz spent in that house was their breaking point. George said, "I was lying in bed and everyone was asleep, and Kathy lifts up off the bed and starts to slide away from the bed and away from me. Lutz said, I feel something get in the bed with us. I'm unable to move. I hear the kids' beds continually slamming up and down on the floor and being dragged. We heard these pigeons on the air conditioner top overhead from the master bathroom, and they're fluttering all night long. Yet there are no pigeons the next morning, or any nest, or anything like that." On January 14, 1976, 28 days after they had moved into the home, they left. The Lutz said they called a priest they had been in contact with throughout the ordeal, and he advised them to leave the house for a night to get some rest. George said, "When we left, we didn't know we weren't coming back. We didn't know that what we were leaving behind, we would never see again." They left almost all of their belongings in the house and never came back. How the world came to know about the family's ordeal was that Jay Anson wrote the book The Amityville Horror in 1977, which details the horrors that the Lutzes claimed to have faced in the house. To date, it sold over 10 million copies, and in 1979 it was made into a movie. Though it hasn't been without its skeptics. Since its publication, almost every detail of the book has come under scrutiny. The couple was bogged down in legal and financial issues. which prompted skeptics to believe that they had motive to create a frightening and fantastical story to sell to the public. The Lutz's former lawyer, William Weber, who they had a falling out with over money issues, came out in 1979 claiming that the three of them came up with the horror story, quote, over many bottles of wine. After telling their story, George and Kathy took a lie detector test to prove their innocence. They passed. Though if you know true crime, you know that doesn't really mean anything. Lie detectors are inadmissible in court. It just means they passed the test, not that they were telling the truth. Their son Daniel, though, who leads a quiet life in Queens, New York as a stonemason, says the house ruined his life and still has nightmares to this day. It's also rumored that the book itself is haunted, evidenced by the fact that the author had a heart attack while writing it, and then 3 people who had been given the original manuscript were injured, one fatally. One had a fire break out in his car while driving with the manuscript. Another almost drowned after their car was submerged in water. The manuscript was in the trunk, and it was reportedly the only thing untouched by water. The third was a woman given the first 2 chapters of the book. She died in a fire the same day she received them. Again, the chapters were left completely untouched. After the Lutz family moved out and their belongings were auctioned off, the house went into foreclosure in 1977. The next owners were James and Barbara Cromartie, who changed the house's address from 112 Ocean Avenue to 108, so curious people would stop paying them unwelcome visits. After an uneventful decade living within its walls, they sold it in 1987. It was again sold in 1997, and most recently in 2017 to an undisclosed owner for $605,000, which was $200,000 less than the original asking price. And that is the true story behind the Amityville Horror. And if you'd like to hear more stories like that, please subscribe.